This is the story of Inhinera. My father shared this story with me not so long ago. He works in Makati and passes through the stretch of the open canal every day. It's a long road in Imus, Cavite that extends to Donghari Road towards Molino, Cavite. On that day, my father left home early because he needed to be in Makati by a.m. I remember he left the house at 4:30 a.m. When he returned home that night, he told us about his experience on the open canal that morning. He said he was driving a bit fast that morning, but he didn't know why he stopped for the woman who flagged him down. He said the woman was begging for a ride to the highway. Take note, my father was on a motorcycle. The woman was wearing a white dress, but she looked like an ordinary woman. My father hesitated because besides wearing a dress, he said he didn't have an extra helmet for the woman hitching a ride. He just apologized and sped away. That night, my father passed through the same road on his way home. While in the middle of Donghari Open Canal Road, he felt a sudden heaviness in his motorcycle as if someone got on. He said he was a bit startled because he was distracted and his hair stood on end. He looked at his motorcycle side mirror and there was no one riding, but it really felt heavy. He prayed repeatedly. As he passed the dark stretch and the road became bright, his motorcycle suddenly felt lighter. 2 weeks after he told us that story, there was an accident in the same area my father passed through. A group of friends died, and the story was that a woman also blocked them and insisted on riding. Unfortunately, they all got into an accident. Since then, my father hasn't passed through that road. People continue to warn others about being careful when passing through that area on Donghari Road. Let's also accompany it with prayers and faith. I can never forget the story my classmate told me about the pirate when I was in grade 6, especially since I almost encountered this creature myself. In the province of Nasugbu, Batangas, my grandmother had a farm up in the mountains, and the path to reach the flatlands and the hut where she lived was surrounded by dense foliage and tall trees. I used to climb up the farm often to fetch spring water for drinking and cooking for my grandmother. In exchange, I could borrow soft drinks or bread from the store in the lower barangay and put it on my grandmother's tab. Aside from this, I also picked star apples during the vacation because the tree bore fruit every season. One afternoon, around 2 or 3 o'clock, as I was walking back home from the farm, my grandmother's dog followed me. This dog was usually free to roam around and naturally friendly to people, unlike my grandmother's other dog, which was tied up and aggressive towards people. The name of the friendly dog was Kapoy. As we walked downhill, Kapoy suddenly changed his behavior and became restless, sniffing the ground and the grass around us. I vividly remember his low but continuous whining. I got goosebumps, and it suddenly occurred to me that there might be someone else around, hiding in the dense vegetation beside the road. I could see the long stretch of the road downhill, and I didn't see anyone else. Although the sun was still high, it was quite dim on the path due to the tall trees, and the dense parts seemed to be getting darker. A few more steps, and Kapoy suddenly left my side and disappeared into the thick bushes and undergrowth. My heart started pounding, and I couldn't see Kapoy anymore, nor could I hear his faint whining. At the same time that I called out Kapoy's name to call him back, there was a sudden sharp and loud cry from the dog, as if it was writhing in pain. Shocked and frightened, I ran downhill. I didn't look back, and my strides were long, almost like I was leaping, feeling light as I descended. I reached home quickly, and the fear dissipated, although I didn't feel tired, but my body was drenched in cold sweat. I didn't realize that I was carrying 2 kilos of star apples in a sack, and I didn't let go of it. I held onto it tightly. When I got home, I just continued with my normal activities, but the incident from that afternoon was still on my mind. I didn't tell my father what happened because I was afraid of being blamed if something happened to the dog. Even as I went to bed, various thoughts and feelings swirled in my mind. There was concern for the dog's condition, hope that Kapoy might return to the farm, fear of going back to the farm again, and relief knowing that I was safe at home. A week later, I learned about the dog's fate from my grandmother. She came down to check on me because I hadn't been to the farm for a long time. It had been almost a week since Kapoy died. A farmer also found it on the way to the spring. This spring was used for washing and bathing by the locals. It was far from the path I took and where I last saw Kapoy, probably about a 15-minute walk. The dog was crippled, with almost broken legs and tail, with no signs of stabbing or shooting. The horror I felt on the day of the incident came rushing back to me because my grandmother and the people in our community were superstitious. They believed that some supernatural being was responsible for the unusual killing of the dog. My grandmother suspected a tikbalang because it was said to have the habit of crippling its victims and stepping on them until they were crippled. I still didn't tell what happened that day, afraid of being blamed for keeping it secret. But according to the farmer who saw the dog's corpse, there were strange footprints near it, seemingly coming from the forest towards my grandmother's farm. The surroundings near the spring were muddy and wet because of the water from it. Hence, the footprints were clearly visible in the mud. The footprints resembled human feet, but all right feet, indicating that the person had identical right feet. They were also deep, indicating the weight of the person who sank into the mud. That's the story my grandmother told me, according to what the farmer witnessed. I couldn't believe my grandmother's stories. I wondered if such creatures were possible and real. All right feet, and killing by breaking the victim's body parts. I almost became a victim during those days. The trauma it caused me was intense. I stopped climbing the mountain then, except when my father forced me to accompany him whenever he wanted to visit the highlands. 7 months later, I was in grade 7, and I had been attending school for 6 months. It was during this time that my classmate told me about the Pirate. According to him, it was an enchanted being that could mimic the form of others, whether human, animal, or other enchantments. You would only know that a person was a Pirate if they had all right feet. This was one thing a Pirate couldn't change. I'm Z, not my real name, and this happened back in 2001 or 2002. I'm not really sure which year exactly, but what I'm certain of is that it was during the time when airguns and laser toys became popular. The region was in Visayas, but I won't specify exactly where, just in an area known for delicious food and excellent cooking skills. That's the clue. So, the house we were renting was surrounded by mountains, with small houses scattered around, not too close to each other. It was kind of a secluded area, with around 100 to 150 families, a small barrio. Anyway, back to the story. Our house was situated between a forest and a cemetery. We were new there, but we noticed that our neighbor's house was unusually dark, and we thought it was uninhabited or didn't have electricity. However, we later found out that someone was living there because it was noisy at night. One day, we decided to get a dog because we really wanted one, especially since our area was surrounded by trees and forests. We named her Daisy. Daisy was a friendly dog, always affectionate. Then one day, we decided to build a small house for Daisy outside because our landlord didn't want dogs inside the house. So we had no choice but to make a small house for Daisy outside. Fast forward a few months, we started hearing strange noises or chants outside, as if someone was singing in the middle of the forest, but we thought it might be someone's birthday celebration, so we didn't really mind since it wasn't allowed. just moderate noise. The next day, strange things started happening. I'm not sure if it was just a coincidence, but we noticed that there was always a black cat looking at our house. We saw dead rats on the path in the forest, and the worst part was when Daisy suddenly died. We didn't know what happened. We just found her surrounded by ants because she was already dead. Then we kept hearing strange noises every early morning, and my dad had a feeling that something unusual was happening in the forest. One day, our older brother asked us around PM to buy Jazz soft drinks for our dinner. My brother and I hurried to buy because it was almost PM, and it was really scary to be caught in the dark in the forest. Here's the pathway. Our house, forest, neighbor's house, store. Then next to the store was a small cemetery. It was about a 5-minute walk before reaching the store. We felt like someone was watching us somewhere, but we were quiet. I felt my brother's nervousness during those times because even I was feeling scared. My heart was pounding with fear, even though nothing was happening, just the feeling of being nervous without knowing why. It was like that. So anyway, we bought the soft drinks and we were on our way home around 5:20, and it was already dark. I told my brother to hurry because it was really scary in the forest and the sky had a different color, like orange-red. Then, as we passed by our neighbor's house, my brother and I heard crying, wailing, and incantations outside. It was deafening and terrifying to hear, the kind that makes your hair stand on end when you hear what they were singing that day. Then it happened. We saw a scary-looking doll hanging on the fence of our neighbor's house, and suddenly the doll laughed, a terrifying laugh. We also heard the insane singing that I couldn't understand. Seriously, we weren't crazy during those times because I saw my brother almost pee in his shorts out of fear. So we ran, my brother and I almost dropped the Jazz we bought because of fear. Then we told our mom and dad what happened because the fear was evident on our faces. Turns out, our neighbor was part of a cult. The noise we heard every early morning, especially on Fridays, was a ritual for them. That's why we kept seeing dead animals, including Daisy. We believed they poisoned them or had something to do with Daisy's death. That's why their house was so dark, surrounded by dark fabrics, and there was a foul smell in the forest that we couldn't find the source of every time we passed by the forest. So maybe that's why there was always a black cat lurking around our house. We never saw the people in that house since it was always closed and the whole house was dim inside. After that incident, we moved out because we were afraid of what they might do to us, since after that incident, we got sick, my brother and I, so my dad was thinking of our safety. We haven't heard from them since we moved to Manila, but someone else rented our place, and they also didn't stay long because of the strange events and noises they heard. Cults are rampant in mountainous areas, so we will never live again in overlooking places.